Okay, today I'm in Lambourne with Josh Apiafi, the founder of Rewards for Racing. Thanks very much, Josh, for agreeing to talk to us today.
Pleasure.
Right, the lawyer's called you. The deal has gone through. 20 million quid has just landed in your bank account. How does it feel?
Oh, I look forward to the day that my lawyer calls me and says there's 20 million in my bank account. I know what you're alluding to. We are still in discussions, but I'll let you know when that call comes through.
Okay, well, tell us about your school days, because I understand you left school at 16. Now, not many people that leave school at 16 end up multi-millionaires at 43, or potential multi-millionaires at 43.
Yeah, I did leave school at 16. I never... Education for me was, I was always looking for something that, learning about stuff I wanted to learn about. And at school, as we all know, you'll get given your various different lessons, and even though you do get some choice when you're doing your GCSEs, it's definitely not going to teach you about business. It doesn't teach you about starting a business or anything like that. Or even, all I wanted to do at 16 was ride horses. To be frank, as fast as possible over as big a fences as possible. And as soon as my last exam was done, I was straight down the. I think it was the M42, M5, and arrived at a rather nice place called Pond House.
Now, before that, your love for racing apparently was kindled at Ludlow when you were about 10. Can you tell us about that story?
Sure. Well, basically, I started riding horses when I was about 4 years old. My dad was in the RAF, and he left in 1979 and moved up to the Midlands and flew out of East Midlands Airport and flew civil. And just down the road from where we were living was a riding school, so I started riding out. But all I wanted to do was go as fast as possible over as big a fences as possible. And I probably didn't have an inherent love of horses, as it was my white knuckle adrenaline rush it was then. And obviously, as I've got older, I've understood the equine species a lot more, and I'm probably closer to them now than I am human beings, to be honest. But going back to how I got into horse racing, so I used to ride, and then my dad and my mum weren't into horses, but then I think it was coming up to my 9th or 10th birthday, and my dad was flying down to Malaga from East Midlands Airport for Orion Airways, and he's turned up at the plane, and anyway, his co-pilot turns up, and his co-pilot's got this big black eye. And I remember Dad telling me the story. He said, he told you, man, he said, "Oi, get in the cockpit and don't let the passengers see you." So anyway, he's got up in the cockpit, got the passengers on board, taken off, flying down to Malaga, and he says, "Right, come on then, tell me where you got the black eye." And the guy turns around and he says, "Well, you won't believe it," thinking it's going to be a fight or something like that. "I got it riding in the Grand National last week." And so Dad's all taken aback. You know what fathers are like, they're always on about career, and his son was probably nearly 6 foot at 10 and riding horses, so not really knowing what he was going to do. And he said, "That's amazing. Would you mind taking my son racing?" And the guy said, "Absolutely no problem at all." The guy's name was Al Hamley. And 2 weeks later, or wherever it was, I was off to Ludlow races for the first time. So, and as soon as I saw it, that was it. That's all I wanted to do. You were not stopping me, full stop, from ever being able to go and try and ride horse at speed over fences. Was for the next 6-7 years, I'm pretty sure I was bribed by my parents to get me through school, because I would have gone on the spot on that day.
So there was obviously no spark of entrepreneurial spirit at that point.
There was definite drive. Whether it was entrepreneurialism is another thing. There was a definite drive for a goal, and I think that's probably it's still with me now.
So you mentioned Pond House, the home of the legendary Martin Pipe stables. You must have some stories about down there.
Probably one of the funny one was actually before I got there. I remember I was getting to 16 and leaving school, and my dad said, "Where are you going to go?" And I said, Simon Sherwood had interestingly finished, just retired from riding, and I said, "Oh, Simon's just starting. I'm thinking of going there, starting with him, and gradually building up." And my dad turned around and went, "Who's the best?" And I said, "Martin Pipe, by far. He's far and away the best." And he turned around, "Well, write him a letter." And I said, "I can't write Martin Pipe a letter." And he said, "Yeah, of course you can." So anyway, we write out this letter and send it off down to Pond House. And then probably 2 days later, and we were a big piss-taking family, I have to say, growing up, and we are still to this day in this house. 2 days later, my mum comes in the living room and she says, "Josh, Mrs. Pipe's on the phone for you." And I'm like, "Yeah, right," thinking it's going to be, Aunt Gladys or something like that, putting an accent on. So I've gone and picked up the phone and gone, "Hello?" And all of a sudden there's, "Hello, Josh, it's Mrs. Pipe." Well, that was it. I was gone. I was like, "Oh," like this. And she said, "We've received your letter." And I was lucky. I'd ridden out for quite a few trainers through my school days, including Kim Bailey and Alex Stewart and people like that, and Richard Lee, who all did me famously proud and taught me a heck of a lot. So I had a quite decent CV for a 16-year-old without even realising it. So anyway, tootled off down to Pond House for an interview about a week later. And my dad then was flying out of Birmingham. So left school early. The interview was at 7. I remember, I think it was 7:30 at night. And I caught a train across to Birmingham. Dad's driven me down the M5. And I'd never done an interview before in my life. And anyway, for the 2 hours from Birmingham down to Pond House, he's saying, "Right, if they ask you this question, what's your answer going to be? If they ask you this question, what's your answer going to be?" And all this kind of stuff. And anyway, we get down there, and I kid you not, Martin and Carol have asked me nearly every single question that Dad has schooled me through for the last 2 hours. And it culminated in Martin turning around and saying, "Josh, you've got a great CV for a 16-year-old. Why do you want to come and work here?" And I turned around, cocky as hell, and turned around to Martin Pipe and said, "Well, Mr. Pipe, if you want to be the best, you've got to go to the best." And at that point, he turned around to my dad and went, "He knows all the fucking answers." And at that point, we realised that I had a job from the age of 16 down at Pond House.
They say he turned around to his father. How influential was his father in the yard at that point?
I think not really the yard, probably the business rather than the yard. Obviously, he an amazing businessman. I would love now to have a sort of desert island, whatever it is, and sit and have a chat with David Pipe Senior, as I'm sure a lot of people would. He fought completely differently. The yard's very smart and lovely now, but when I was down there, it was a bit like a scrap heap because David Pipe Senior would be buying various different things. He bought an old Greyhound stadium, which is the indoor canter, but would have sat there for 10 years until you need it. He bought a masher for the all-weather gallop that was used as I think on a potato farm. He just saw things before their time, and eventually they would come about. But yeah, I'd love now to actually sit down and have a cup of tea with him.
Now, I'm guessing that you were possibly the only sort of, how should we say, person of ethnic minority working in the yard at that point. Was that ever something that was sort of you were discriminated against?
It was at the yard. It's been throughout my entire life. I think it has, and it's the same as my dad. My dad's from a Nigerian background. He was an orphan, and we've both grown up in industries that are predominantly white. Do we see ourselves as any different? No. Does it drive us in a different way? Probably yes. I think you've got to be very good. I've just watched the documentary on black football players called Out of Their Skin with Ian Wright, and I think that and that was in the 80s, 90s, same sort of period that we're talking about now. And I think it drove you. You had to be stronger. You had to be better, and you put your head down and you kept grafting. There was no giving up. So. And there was no one to turn to, really. So there was no sort of mentor above you.
They're talking of mentors, just briefly, your dad would have been a good one, wouldn't he? I understand he started off with virtually no education, ended up flying planes and then owning an airline. Is that correct?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's. We have a lot of banter between him and I. He's probably more my mate than anything else. Classic Morgan Freeman look-alike. And the worst golfer you've ever seen in your life, and finds it hugely frustrating that he's done everything he's done in life has been a success other than his game of golf. So we still see him pretty regularly, and I still get a thick ear now and again.
Now, Rob, you're saying that you were driven, going back to Pond House, you were very keen, but you're 6 foot plus. Were your ambitions ever really to be a professional jockey?
Not really, no. I love being an amateur jockey. The problem we had then is I think we had nearly 10 jockeys in the yard. Scoo being the pro, and then like to Jonathan Lower, 5 or 6 conditionals, 3 amateurs, including David Pipe Jr. himself. So I actually wasn't the tallest jockey in the yard. With Dave Pipe at 6'4", I actually looked quite small compared to him. But it was also where friendships were formed. It was called the Three Musketeers, were me, Tom Dascombe and Les Reynolds, and we used to have some laughs, and they remain. The great thing about horse racing is it might be a big industry in some respects, but it's a lot smaller, and there's a lot of friends that will be with you for the rest of your life, and those two are just solid confidants.
Any particular good memories from those days?
Well, I don't quite know which ones I can go through. I think probably the one that my worst one that I still shiver and come out in a cold sweat about is I used to look after a horse called Vestris Abu, and anyway, it got a bit of a fever or a temperature, and it hadn't been well. It was on box rest, and these horses were in the isolation row or the isolation barn, which is also where they kept the helicopter up behind the back of Pond House, so nowhere near the yard. And I was up there one morning, just me, and I'd stuck my barrow into the stable. And started mucking out. Something happened, and the horse spooked, and it knocked the barrow out the way, and it's run out, and it has got into the Pipe's back garden with Mrs. Pipe's rose bed, manicured lawn. It was like an Augusta green, and all of a sudden, this horse in bottomless ground it's been on box rest for 3 months. This is the first time it's seen daylight or freedom, and it is galloping everywhere around this ripping, and I am in tears. And I think Tom Dascombe was one of them that came up, and I was like, Tom, quick, go and get one of the head lads. And he just stood there and burst into tears of laughter, ran down, got half the people from the yard to basically come and have a look. At that point, I remember Mrs. Pipe getting out of bed and basically looking through the window and going apoplectic. And I was basically spent the whole morning treading in divots once we'd eventually caught this horse that had thought he'd escaped. So that's a story on me and a less rude one than some of them I could probably come out with.
No, I was going to ask you if there was a catalyst moment after riding 10 winners from about 100 rides that made you decide to turn in what you were doing and start racing Link. Was that it?
It wasn't then. I left. I spent a couple of years down at Pond House. I then went back to college. I rode in America for a year as well, and I always knew I was going to be too tall to be a jockey, but then equally I was lucky to be brought up in a great family. You know, Dad was a pilot, Mum was a teacher, so it was obviously being a pilot. We had some great holidays and all that kind of stuff, and we had a good quality of life. And at the time, I realised that if I wanted to have that kind of quality of life, I wasn't going to get it from just riding out on horses. So I needed to look at what I was doing, and if I wasn't going to be a professional jockey and I didn't want to be a trainer, what was I going to do within the sport? So I actually spent a heck of a lot of time, but every waking minute of my life for about a year was working out what I want to do, and applying for all sorts of different jobs.